Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, says those variants could fuel a surge of 20,000 new cases per day by mid-March if public health restrictions are relaxed further. And Tam says vaccination rates against the virus aren't high enough to stop it from spreading rapidly.
Our vaccine programs are beginning to escalate, but they haven't got to a point where enough people are protected.
Now, you heard in Julie's newscast that we are detecting more cases of that UK variant, which is more contagious, and early research suggests it may be deadlier. To help us figure out what exactly is happening here, we're joined by one of our regular guests, Raywat Deonandan. He's an epidemiologist at the University of Ottawa. And, Raywat, I'm sure a lot of us who hear this news, we're thinking, in Manitoba and many places around Canada, we're coming out of lockdowns. Some health restrictions are slowly easing. Cases are going down. Deaths are going down. So we're kind of wondering, what more at this point? How is it that we can be potentially dealing with another resurgence?
Well, we always knew that the third wave was not only possible, but likely, and it looks like the new variants will be the mechanism of the third wave. So the modeling presented gives a timeline for that resurgence that matches pretty much what we were predicting for a third wave anyway. It's just that this third wave looks pretty big. Now, it's controversial exactly how big it will be. The modeling might be off, but it seems likely that the new variants are going to push a resurgence of cases pretty dramatically in the next month or so.
What are we seeing from other countries that have experienced the variants when it comes to their third waves?
Well, that's a curious question because the UK, where B117 was first identified and where it's most prevalent, is seeing a decline in cases. So that's curious, right? And the answer to that is probably that the UK has a lot more vaccines than we do. Same with the USA. So the American models aren't predicting the same dire predicament that ours are, probably because they have a lot more vaccines than we do. So it's too early to say how the rest of the world has responded to the new variants because really only one country, the UK, has experienced it. But what we're seeing here is an R value that is significantly higher than 1 for the new variants, while COVID classic remains less than 1. It is a parallel pandemic in many ways.
You talk about that R variant. What do you mean, or that R number? What do you mean specifically by that, Raywat?
Well, it means that we're seeing that cases of the UK variant B117 are spreading much faster than cases of the old variant of COVID classic, as I call it. So we're seeing across the country that COVID classic, and I'm trying to make that a thing now, is declining not rapidly, but noticeably, whereas those cases of the new variant are accelerating rapidly. So again, we're tracking two different pandemics, really.
It's interesting, though, in the cases we've now had 4 here in Manitoba, health officials are indicating to us that it hasn't spread beyond those individual cases. Now, the first case that was identified, again, they had 5 household contacts that were isolating and tested twice, and it didn't spread further. These other 3 were told to have between 4 and 24 close contacts, and that some of them are still in the process of self-isolating, but they're telling us that they have not spread further. Does that show that people, despite the fact they've traveled internationally and come home and had contacts, if they're close contacts, they're still following, as our doctor here says, the fundamentals, that you can still stop the spread of an even more contagious variant?
Yes, the tools still work. All it means is that the margin of error for using the tools is less. So mask wearing works, distancing works, hand hygiene works, ventilation in particular works. It just means that you can't slip up as much as we have been in the past. So there's nothing magical about these new variants. They're just a little more transmissible and possibly more lethal. So 2 things I think we need to be doing better, and that is wearing masks better, and probably better quality masks, but also really looking better at ventilation systems.
You touched on it a little bit there, Raywat. Do we know exactly why these variants, and again, we'll use the UK variant as an example, but why it's so much more transmissible? Because as far as I recall, COVID-19 on its own is already more contagious than the flu.
That's right. It's probably due to the shape of the spike protein on the surface of the virus. It seems to bind better to receptors on our cell. It's a more snug fit, therefore it slips into our cells more easily. It's a physical thing more than anything else, probably. As a result, you need probably a lesser viral load to get infected and less time of exposure to get infected. All this comes down to the physics of receptors binding to cells.
I'm also seeing reports that a version, if you will, of a California strain was combining with another variant that they're now watching. Is that something to be expected as well, that perhaps a Manitoba COVID-19 version may combine with B117 to create something new as well?
Yes, this is called a recombinant event. It was expected. In fact, several papers several months ago predicted this would happen. Coronaviruses have been known to do this. And it happens when two closely related viruses infect the same person. And the way the viruses work is they inject your cells with genetic material to have your cell create more of itself. And so these two different viruses are now flooding your cell with RNA, and they get confused and they end up swapping genetic material, and a new monster creature arises. This might have been happening all over the world, but now we see it because this high-tech lab happened to observe it this one time in California. It's not something to be worried about just yet, because it's just as likely that the recombinant hybrid is less lethal and less transmissible as it is more transmissible. So it can go either way. So I wouldn't worry about this just yet.
Now, we've heard from a lot of experts out there, Raywat, that, if in many countries, and I'm thinking especially the US, but many countries hadn't allowed COVID-19 to spread so rampantly, if some places had more stringent lockdowns and public health measures, these variants, not that they wouldn't have happened, but we might have been dealing with fewer of them, because the more you allow the virus to spread, the more it has a chance to mutate. So knowing that, is it possible that in a world where, and again, this is, reality meets our hopes essentially, but in a world where every country or every region would have had the best public health measures possible, is it possible we would be dealing with fewer variants now?
Yes, 100%. I'm reminded of the sagacious, prescient words of Dr. Mike Ryan at WHO, who said, "Do not wait. Act now, act hard, get ahead of the virus. The virus will not wait." So those places that acted hard and early did best. And if we all acted hard and early and prevented transmission, we would not be in this predicament. There would not be as much transmission. There would not be as much opportunity for mutation and recombinant events. Absolutely.
Always appreciate your time, University of Ottawa epidemiologist Raywat Deonandan. Have a great weekend. I'm sure we'll talk again next week.
Thank you.